World with special guest appearances from Metaphor, Terry B, In the Mix, Eminem, Megan Thee Stallion, Dr. Dre, Kendrick Lamar, and much more. It's the countdown to
2021.
And you're invited live right here on
Rainier Avenue Radio World.
Would you like to see when your favorite Rainier Avenue Radio show comes on? Check out our show schedule, updated weekly at rainieravenue.radio.world.
You're listening to the news on Rainier Avenue Radio.world. I'm Asher. Today is Wednesday, December 30th. The news on Rainier Avenue Radio is live every Wednesday from 6:30 to 7, providing you with current, trustworthy, useful news content focused on super service to the local South Seattle audience. We will not tell you what to think, but instead provide the basics for you to discern and decide for yourself. Tonight, we'll talk about the Lake City Shopping Center fire, no prosecutions in Tamir Rice's death, world coronavirus news, and how COVID-19 changed the NFL. Now on to the local news. Patch.com reports that a new phone scam is making the rounds in King County, where callers claim to be from the prosecutor's office and demand money over made-up crimes. In one of the calls, the scammer identified themselves as King County prosecuting attorney Dan Satterberg and asked for $890 to be wired via MoneyGram in exchange for dropping non-existent charges related to contracting an underage person. The call used a spoofed number appearing to be legitimate for the prosecutor's office at 206-977-1200. Prosecutor said anyone charged legitimately with a crime will be notified via a formal summons or a warrant, which both require handling in person. If you received a suspected scam call, don't panic. Write down any information you can gather about the call. Contact your local law enforcement to report the attempted fraud. The non-emergency number for the Seattle Police Department is 206-625-5011, or make a report online. And 4, if the King County Prosecuting Attorney's Office has actually charged you with a crime separate from these scam calls, notify your attorney.
A 2-alarm fire that destroyed a strip of businesses in Seattle's Lake City neighborhood late Monday was intentionally set, Seattle fire investigators say. Seattle fire investigators determined the cause of the fire was incendiary. The arson bomb squad and the Seattle Fire Department fire marshal are investigating the fire. Officials believe it spread quickly through the void space between the roof and ceiling that connects the businesses. A witness told them several people were breaking into a business in the 3000 block of Northeast 127th Street, according to the Seattle Police. The caller told police he watched the people leave in a car and that the burglarized businesses was on fire, King 5 reports.
A brand new state-of-the-art ferry terminal opened in Mukilteo on Tuesday after 2 decades of planning. It's the first time in 40 years that Washington State Ferries has unveiled a new terminal. It cost about $187 million and was paid through federal and state funding, Cairo 7 reports. According to WSDOT, ferry traffic is expected to surge 25% in the next 2 decades. They say the goal with the new terminal is to keep passengers safe and happy for many years to come. One of the biggest changes for passengers is a new boarding process, which will likely result in far fewer backups and traffic headaches than before.
For the first time in more than 80 years, salmon have spawned above the Grand Coulee Dam. It's the beginning of a study by the Confederated Tribes of the Colvin Reservation to bring salmon back to the Upper Columbia River. Bringing salmon back to the Upper Columbia has been a goal since the habitat was blocked by dams more than 8 decades ago. In a 2019 ceremony, Colville members released 30 salmon above Chief Joseph Dam and, a few days later, above Grand Coulee. It was the first time salmon had returned to their traditional waters, Crosscut reports. The effort shows a relatively sound collaboration between Pacific Northwest indigenous peoples and Western scientists, as they work diligently to understand how to return salmon to the depleted waterways which define our modern history.
A Pierce County man has filed a federal civil rights lawsuit against a Lakewood police canine handler and his supervisors, claiming the officer had his dog attack him after he had been arrested. Per Como News, Adrian Sims says he has surrendered to Officer James Seiler and 2 Pierce County deputies after fleeing a domestic disturbance in Bonnie Lake on October 2017 and was in handcuffs when he was bitten. Seiler and the Lakewood Police Department have been sued 5 times since 2011 for incidents involving police dogs and alleged excessive use of force, resulting in settlements and medical payments totaling almost $300,000.
A coronavirus outbreak at a Costco in Yakima County has infected 145 employees. Per Como News, health officials say the rapid increase in cases at the store is similar to a quote-unquote super spreader event in which multiple people are infected at the same time. All 145 employees that have tested positive are in isolation or quarantine, but the store itself remains open. The store employs a total of 383 people. Yakima County public health officials say the number of COVID-19 cases at the store shot up quickly from 68 on Thursday to 145 by Monday. And officials said the number of infections could go even higher.
Alaska Airlines will limit animals allowed on flights to train service dogs early next year. Per Patch.com, the Seattle-based airline is barring emotional support animals for reservations booked after January 11th, 2021, and on all flights after February 28th. Earlier this year, the U.S. Department of Transportation dropped a requirement for airlines to provide the same accommodations for emotional support animals as those mandated for formally trained dogs. The decision followed feedback from airlines and disability advocates that reported behavior that caused injuries, damage, and other hazards on flights. Under the rules that take effect in January, Alaska flights will allow up to 2 trained service dogs, and guests will be required to complete a federal form certifying their animal is properly trained and vaccinated. Forms can be submitted via email or in person at the airport. This is the news on Rainier Avenue Radio.world. When we come back with national news, you'll hear about no prosecutions in Tamir Rice's case and more. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to Rainier Avenue Radio.world. This is the national news. The U.S. Department of Justice will not charge any of the officers involved in the fatal shooting of Tamir Rice, a black 12-year-old boy who was killed by police in Cleveland in 2014. Per NPR, the department has closed its investigation. The Justice Department announced it found insufficient evidence to, quote, support federal criminal charges against Cleveland Division of Police, or CDP, officers Timothy Lohman and Frank Garnbach, unquote. Video footage of the killing, which happened in daylight on November 22, 2014, shows the child was shot within 2 seconds of the police arriving at the scene. Lohman, who fired 2 bullets into Rice, and Garnbach alleged that they believed he was carrying a gun. In fact, the boy was playing with a toy air pellet gun near a playground at a city recreation center. There were no prosecutions in the case. In December 2015, a grand jury declined to bring criminal charges against Lohman and Garnbach.
Louisville police have taken steps that could result in the firing of 2 officers connected to Breonna Taylor's death. The one who had sought the no-knock search warrant that led detectives to her apartment, and another found to have opened fire. Detectives Joshua Janes and Miles Cosgrove received pre-termination letters on Tuesday, media outlets report. It came after a professional standards unit investigation found they had violated department procedures for preparation of a search warrant and truthfulness. Janes was not present during the shooting at Taylor's apartment in Louisville. About 12 hours later, he secured a warrant with a quote-unquote no-knock clause from a judge, AP reports. In James' pre-termination letter, Interim Chief Yvette Gentry said the officer committed, quote, extreme violations of our policies which endangered others. The shooting death of the 26-year-old black woman in her home sparked months of protests in Louisville alongside national protests over racial injustice and police misconduct.
Workers dismantled a statue of Abraham Lincoln in Boston after the city agreed with protesters who say the memorial is demeaning and lacks proper context. Per NPR, the statue depicts Lincoln holding his hand over a kneeling black man, a figure modeled on Arthur Alexander, the last man captured under the Fugitive Slave Act. The Boston Art Commission voted to remove the city's prominent Lincoln statue 6 months ago, as protesters against racial injustice called for controversial monuments to either be taken down entirely or placed into a new historical context. Similar sentiments were heard in Washington and elsewhere over the summer of 2020, as protests and debates erupted over how best to display markers of the U.S.'s troubled history of racial discrimination and inequality.
The Massachusetts State Senate joined the State House of Representatives in passing legislation that enshrines abortion rights in state law and expands access to 16-year-olds. Per NPR, the move by the two chambers overrides Governor Charlie Baker's veto of the measure last week. It also lowers the age at which individuals can seek an abortion without the consent of a parent or a judge from 18 to 16. The Roe Act Coalition, which coordinated a statewide effort to pass the new law, celebrated the Senate vote, calling it a victory and a major milestone. Governor Baker vetoed the bill on Christmas Eve after the legislature rejected his revisions. The Republican governor said he, quote-unquote, strongly supports the right to access reproductive health care, including the provision in the bill that would make abortions available after 24 weeks of pregnancy if the fetus would not survive after birth. He objected to the revisions to the law that removed legal barriers for minors seeking to terminate a pregnancy.
U.S. Representative-elect Luke Letlow of Louisiana died on Tuesday of COVID-19, his campaign said. Letlow, 41, announced on December 18th that he had tested positive for the novel coronavirus. Letlow, a Republican, won a runoff election on December 5th for the 5th district seat, which represents Northeast and Central Louisiana, and was due to be sworn in on Sunday. He is survived by his wife and 2 children, Reuters reports. Louisiana Governor John Bel Edwards and U.S. House of Representatives Speaker Nancy Pelosi were among those that expressed sorrow and paid tribute to Letlow.
A man in Colorado has become the first known U.S. case of the newly identified strain of COVID-19 circulating in the UK, AP reports. The new variant is thought to be more contagious than other established variants and has prompted some countries to restrict travel from the UK. Although the new variant has not been found in the US until now, the CDC noted that it was probably already circulating through the country. The agency said while the new variant had not been identified through sequencing efforts, quote, labs have only 51,000 of the 17 million US cases, and the variant might not have been picked up. Detection of this new variant in the U.S. comes as COVID-19 continues to spread seemingly unabated. There has been 19.5 million confirmed cases in the U.S. so far and over 338,000 deaths, according to Johns Hopkins University data.
A Boeing 737 MAX carried paying passengers on a U.S. flight Tuesday for the first time since March 2019, as American Airlines put the aircraft back into service. Per NPR, the planes have been grounded worldwide after 2 deadly crashes highlighted the safety problems. American Flight 718 took off from Miami around 10:40 a.m., heading to New York's LaGuardia Airport. The plane landed ahead of schedule shortly after 1 p.m. The airplane is the first U.S. carrier to return Boeing's jetliner to passenger use, a move it announced in November when the Federal Aviation Administration cleared the way for the 737 MAX to return into commercial flight. In response to the FAA move, airlines in Brazil and Mexico put the plane back into service earlier this month. This is the news on RainierAvenueRadio.world. When we come back with global news, you'll hear about world coronavirus news and more. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to RainierAvenueRadio.world. This is the global news. Argentina's Senate voted on Wednesday to legalize abortion, a first for a big country in Latin America, and a triumph for women's rights campaigners achieved over the visceral objection from the Catholic Church. Abortion is extremely rare in a region where the church has held cultural and political sway for centuries. Previously, it was allowed on demand only in Cuba, Uruguay, and parts of Mexico, Reuters reports. The fiercely contentious vote was held at 4 a.m. after a marathon debate that lasted through the night. In a vote of 38 to 29 with one abstention, the Senate backed the government proposal to allow termination to the 14th week of pregnancy, as the lower house had already approved it this month.
Britain authorized an easy-to-handle coronavirus vaccine Wednesday, while also deciding to stretch out the time between doses to allow more people to get some level of protection faster as infections surge. The vaccine, developed by Oxford University and drug maker AstraZeneca, is expected to be relied on in many countries, being relatively cheap and being able to be stored only in refrigerators rather than at ultra-cold or freezer temperatures, which other vaccines require. Because infections are spreading so rapidly in the UK, officials are now recommending prioritizing delivering a first dose to as many people as possible. Officials say both protecting people even after just 1 or 2 recommended doses, and that increasing the time between doses might even have a benefit, AP reports.
A landslide in a Norwegian village has injured 10 people, left 12 people unaccounted for, and buried houses under dark mud. Per BBC News, about 700 people have been evacuated from the village, which lies about 15 miles northeast of the capital, Oslo. Prime Minister Erna Solberg said the situation was still so unstable that only rescues by helicopter could be carried out. Of those still missing, police said in a statement, quote, "We don't know if these people are in the landslide area, if they are away on holiday, or in another way unable to contact police." A spokeswoman for Norway's Water Resources and Energy Directorate said that the landslide was a so-called, quote-unquote, quick clay slide, measuring about 300 meters by 700 meters. Quick clay is a kind of clay found in Norway and Sweden that can collapse and become fluid when it comes under stress.
Activists and human rights groups are calling on the Palestinian Authority to release Sama Abdul Hadi, a DJ known as the quote-unquote Palestinian techno queen. Per BBC News, Abdul Hadi was detained on Sunday after she organized an event at Nabi Musa in the West Bank, where an Islamic shrine, a mosque, and a hostel are located. She said she had the necessary permits from the Ministry of Tourism to shoot a film that included techno party scenes. However, some religious Palestinian Muslims said the event was quote-unquote disrespectful. Nabi Musa is considered by them to be the burial place of the prophet Moses. The incident stirred social tensions that were reflected on social media. Some people wrote online that they found it quote-unquote offensive that techno music was played at a religious site, despite the fact that Abdul Hadi had the required permits. Others called for more freedoms and expressed hopes for more diversity within the Palestinian population.
Iran is to give $150,000 to the families of each of the 176 people who died when its Revolutionary Guards shot down a passenger jet last January. Per BBC News, the Ukraine International Airlines Boeing 737 was struck by 2 missiles shortly after taking off from Tehran. After initially denying responsibility, Iran admitted it had shot down the UIA flight, quote-unquote, unintentionally. The victims included 82 Iranians, 63 Canadians, 11 Ukrainians, including 9 crew members, 4 Afghans, 4 Britons, and 3 Germans.
A court on China's mainland sentenced 10 Hong Kong pro-democracy activists to up to 3 years in prison. Per NPR, the activists tried this summer to flee to Taiwan by a speedboat, but they were intercepted at sea and detained in China. The main charge against the group was that they sought to cross an international border illegally, but rather than return them to Hong Kong, where the police have deemed them fugitives, Chinese authorities opted to detain and prosecute the activists on the mainland. The Yantian District People's Court in Shenzhen imposed the toughest punishment on Tang Kai-yin and Quinn Moon, who were accused of organizing the trip. They are to serve 3 years and 2 years respectively, along with a fine of up to $3,000. 8 other activists were ordered to spend 7 months in prison and pay smaller fines. All the sentences include the nearly 4 months the activists already spent in custody.
German officials said they won't be able to relax lockdown restrictions in early January as the country recorded more than 1,000 deaths in one day for the first time. The figure was likely swollen by delayed reporting, but underlined the severity of the situation, Al Jazeera reports. Meanwhile, Israel's health ministry reported the highest number of new coronavirus infections in over 2 months. Nations across the world remain in bad spots with the virus as a new variant begins to hinder efforts to stifle new outbreaks. Today, the WHO Director General appealed for $4 billion to buy COVID-19 vaccines for distribution in lower and middle-income countries through the COVAX vaccine facility. He was marking a year since the first cases of the novel coronavirus were reported by China and urged countries to ensure the vaccines are made available to people at risk everywhere, not just in rich nations. This is the news on Rainier Avenue Radio.world. We'll come back with sports. You'll hear about how COVID-19 changed the NFL, maybe forever, and more. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to Rainier Avenue Radio.world. This is the sports news. Veteran guard Joel Ayayi hasn't been putting up big numbers for top-ranked Gonzagas this season, but that changed in an 88-58 win over Northern Arizona on Monday night. Per Como News, Ayayi opened the scoring with a three-pointer and finished with 17 points and 10 rebounds. Ayayi went 6 of 8 from the field and 4 for 5 from a three-point range as the Zags routed the Lumberjacks. Drew Tim added 14 points, Dominic Harris scored 12, and Andrew Nembhard finished with 10 points and 7 assists for Gonzaga, making it 8-0, which has the nation's longest home winning streak at 42 games. Cameron Shelton scored 20 points and grabbed 9 rebounds for Northern Arizona, 1-6, which was undone by 35% shooting. Jane Green had 12 points. Gonzaga used to play the Lumberjacks regularly when both were in the Big Sky Conference, but this was only their second meeting since 1979. Ayayi scored 9 points as Gonzaga jumped to a 28-8 lead after 8 minutes. The Zags made 12 of their first 16 shots. The Gonzaga pushed the lead to 36-14 with just under 7 minutes left in the first half, dominating the Lumberjacks in the paint 20-8.
Because NCAA eligibility was essentially paused in 2020, the Huskies' leading rusher, Sean McGrew, is allowed to return for a 6th season next fall. According to the Seattle Times, in just 4 games last season, the 5'7", 175-pound running back led the Huskies in rushing yards per carry, and rushing touchdown. The former St. John Bosco standout has compiled 854 rushing yards, 5.2 yards per carry, and 8 touchdowns so far in his UW career. Which isn't to say McGrew is guaranteed anything. After all, the Huskies should have 5 other scholarship running backs next season. Redshirt sophomore Richard Newton, redshirt freshman Cameron Davis, true freshman Javion Sunday, and Sam Adams II, and incoming freshman Kalen Berry. A 6th fifth-year senior, Kamari Pleasant, has yet to announce whether he'll be back in 2021. But in the last 24 hours, UW coach Jimmy Lake learned that his leading receiver, leading pass rusher, and top offensive lineman will be back in Seattle next season.
The Browns didn't begin preparing for the Steelers on the field, but rather via Zoom calls. Hardly ideal before their biggest game in decades. Cleveland had 2 more positive COVID-19 tests, including one for an assistant coach on Wednesday, throwing its schedule into disorder as the team gets ready to play Pittsburgh on Sunday, with a spot in the playoffs riding on the outcome. The Browns, who have 9 players currently on the COVID-19 reserve list, will make the postseason for the first time since 2002 if they win. The team has not yet identified the positive player, and coach Kevin Stefanski would not reveal which of his staff members may have to miss the season finale, AP reports. The NFL is monitoring the Browns' situation to determine whether the game needs to be moved.
Coastal Carolina's Jamie Chadwell is the Associated Press College Football Coach of the Year after leading the Chanticleers to a surprising near-perfect season. Chadwell is has received 16 first-place votes and 88 points from the AP Top 25 panel to finish ahead of Indiana's Tom Allen, who is second with 14 first-place votes and 66 points. Chadwell is the first Sun Belt Conference coach to win the AP award, which was established in 1988, and the third coach to earn it with a team from outside the Power 5 leagues. UCF's Scott Frost was AP's Coach of the Year in 2017, and Gary Patterson won the first of his 2 AP awards with TCU in 2009 when the Horned Frogs were competing in the Mountain West.
Through plenty of potholes, seas of empty seats, and enough piped-in crowd noise to make broadcast sounds sound like sitcom laugh tracks, the NFL is about to put the wacky and worrisome 2020 season in its rear view. Navigating the 2020 season during the novel coronavirus crisis has yielded many lessons for a league born in the shadows of the world's last pandemic in 1918. Commissioner Roger Goodell said the NFL will confer with the Players Union after the Super Bowl to discuss what measures might make sense keeping once this crisis subsides. What we know is many changes are due to take place in the NFL as it struggles to stay relevant and confront its demons.
Liverpool's clash with Man U in January will be played behind closed doors at Anfield after the UK government moved the Liverpool region to Tier 3 in the national coronavirus restrictions. Per ESPN, the change in Liverpool's status means that all Premier League fixtures will now be played without supporters present until further notice due to none of the top 20 flight clubs being based in Tier 2 areas, which allowed for 2,000 fans to attend sporting fixtures. The city had previously been in Tier 2, but moved up due to an escalation in COVID-19 infections across the country. Barring a significant drop in the COVID-19 infection rate between now and January 13th, when the tiers will be reviewed, the biggest game of the Premier League season so far will be played behind closed doors.
Now it's time to go over tonight's show plugs. Tomorrow, December 31st, Rainier Avenue Radio will host its New Year's Eve 2021 Countdown Throwdown. Starting at 11 p.m., you can count down to 2021 with Grand Mixer GMS, appearances from Metaphor and Terry B+, custom mixes featuring Eminem, Megan Thee Stallion, Dr. Dre, Kendrick Lamar, and more.
And there have been a lot of intense stories this year, so Kendra and I have narrowed down our top 10 of 2020. My top 5 are when the CHOP came about and Carmen's Best, our police chief, resigned. Then the deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Rayshard Brooks, Dijon Kizzee, Walter Wallace Jr., Jonathan Price, Casey Goodson Jr., and Andre Hill were very, very significant to this year and prove it to be historic with the Black Lives Matter uprising. Then the Algerian-Azerbaijani war and the resolution will prove to be historic. And finally, I guess, the Afghan Taliban ceasefire, because of the historic effort to finally end the world's longest-running war.
As for my top stories, there are the multiple stories about legalizing or overturning abortion rights. There was that one story where there was outrage where a 10-year-old rape victim's name was put online, creating a whole story about abortion as well. There was the political crisis in Peru, Washington's continuous battles against COVID-19, the state just constantly trying to fight it, and also the accusations of sterilizations to get the women in ICE custody. So this has been the news on Rainier Avenue Radio.world. We thank you for watching. It's been a really hard year for everyone. We here at Rainier Avenue Radio hope that all of you stay safe and healthy. Here's hoping for the best in 2021. Otherwise, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.